All right, so let's move to the session. So I'm gonna give a little kind of lecture myself first, as my students will be all used to it. Well, we'll talk for very briefly and kind of open up what this session is all about and why we are here today to talk about these different things. So basically, this session is entirely based on the special issue just recently published at this open access journal, in-house journal of ours, which is Studies in Technology Enhanced Learning. And this session, special issue title is Autoethnography in Online Doctoral Education. So as you can see, there are two themes here. Autoethnography is certainly one thing that we're going to talk about today, but also online doctoral education as a setting where this autoethnography have been done is really important for us to come back and unpack as well. So I'm going to talk about why autoethnography among all different types of research we can potentially do, especially in the TEL program, which is Technology Enhanced Learning at Lancaster University. There are different and probably more popular and dominant research approaches, but why we had to choose autoethnography to just kick off our doctoral journey. That will be first part. And second part, what you mean by doing online doctoral education. So doctoral study itself is pretty complex and messy process. What does that mean if you have to do that at the distance from institution and tutors and your colleagues? So that's the second part we're going to unpack together. And two of those themes nicely intertwine for us to give really good fit to think and discuss today. So I'll start with the TEL research. I mean, all my students have already seen these photos many times, so excuse me, but I'm going to do it again. So basically, in TEL field, we have a lot of pressure now going on about this big data, and as you can see, artificial intelligence, who is going to do research for us? And there are a lot of pressure in a way that funding schemes that we have to go for always want us to use either big data or artificial intelligence, some new technology. There are a lot of still very technology and data driven initiatives that people are trying to go bigger and faster. And that's what's going on in the TEL field. And of course, we have choice to learn how to do learning analytic or learner analytic, gather all big data. And we can also learn artificial intelligence and different programs to speed ourselves up to look into those messy data to understand the patterns and different groups of students we're dealing with and potentially giving them personalized education opportunity. I can't really get it yet, but that's all what people are talking about. However, I mean, at the end of the day, what this TEL research is all about, I mean, if you look into the foundation or core of it, it's like we have some sense of dissatisfaction toward what's going on in education system or classroom, if it's very micro and individual kind of learning process. And there are a lot of struggles that people are experiencing. So basically, we want to use different technology to help people to overcome those dissatisfaction and struggles. And those struggles and dissatisfactions are pretty embedded in personal life and living context. And it's really about how people interact with other people within the society, no matter how big the society that we can focus on. So in that context, the struggle itself is pretty complex. It's not only struggle having just one person sitting down feeling miserable about the life. It's really genuine struggles that people feel interpersonal. And then when they interact with other people in their own context, they feel something is not very satisfactory. And if you look into institution or national and international kind of relationship now we're really heading to, those struggles are even more difficult for any researcher to even understand. So that's the context. And then we can, again, it's great that with technology, we have a lot of data. So those data, looking into those data can give us some solution or breakthrough. I'm not gonna argue here and criticize those new approaches to research. However, at least based on my experience and some of my students' experience, those struggles is pretty difficult to even unpack. So what kind of data we're going to collect, whether data is larger or small, it doesn't really matter. But like what the struggles and the problem we want to have as subject of inquiry is looking like this. It's like messy puzzles. And so what we're going to do about it. So that's the phase, that's the TEL research at the moment that we're, as a TEL researcher, we're facing in the field. So I'm going to move to, I don't want to conclude it yet because we have our panelists, but I want to move to online doctoral education bit now. Let's talk about online doctoral education. It's pretty good things that a lot of you lovely people from around the world can join us and do research together. It's something very novel and I'm personally very excited about. So when we talk about doctoral research or doctoral education study, often we use this kind of metaphor of journey. So it can be individual journey, like being a heated balloon and kind of flying as you wish. That's pretty romantic and idealist. And also, we can just say the journey has like straightforward kind of road in front of us. We can just drive. There is even no car interrupting us. And then we can get to see where we are heading to. But as you know, here, many of you have finished doctoral study, not even online, offline even. We know these are not what doctoral education looks like in real life. It's pretty foggy. We don't really know. I, as a doctoral student, always been having huge, sense of anxiety and uncertainty about my own future and the research. I don't know whether I was doing it all right or not. And our doctoral students have similar experience like that. And for me, this is my best kind of image that I try to describe what it means to do doctoral education or doctoral study. So we're dealing with fragmented realities of our life and our colleagues' life and tutors' life all together mixed up in very messy environment, which we call Moodle, if you would try to be really narrow it down. But beyond Moodle, there's a lot going on. So doctoral education itself and studies that we're experiencing is pretty messy, just like how TEL phenomenon is. So I'm not very helping here because I just talk about how TEL, the subject of research is complex, and I talk about what we do and the program is pretty complex and what we're going to do about it. Well, so where we got to is, since things are too complex, let's just focus on a little piece that we can do. We can start from everywhere, but one of the things that autoethnography allow us to do is to find the little focus, which is piece of puzzle, which is us. So we kind of look into it and try to start from there to understand this complexity and within our capacity to unpack the complexity. So autoethnography is a simple definition that we kind of added our kind of little bit of notions here. It is qualitative research methodology, if you want to put simply, but it's more than that. It's like political and personal act of writing about the self. But our purpose is not to understand self only, but also explore and make sense of our own struggles and emotion and positive or negative kind of experiences in relation to the bigger complex surrounding, as I unpack how complex those are even for individual researcher to access. So this is where the session, this is all I prepared, actually. I don't have more than that, but I trust all our 4 panel members who can bring this conversation forward. But before introducing our first panelist, I just want to briefly introduce lovely authors because they deserve to be mentioned. So this is the special issue. As you can see, the beautiful cover. Ironically, I put the idealistic photo to hope that everyone can be happy and successful in the future. But we had 16 doctoral autoethographers submitted their article and contribute to this. And as you can see that we start with the special issue has editorial and commentary. I'm pretty sure some of you have read it before coming today. So 5 teachers we have Salwa, Thomas, and Constance, and Penny, and Karen. So I'm just so used to call their name in short term, and when I read it, I couldn't even say it. But anyway, we're all good, right? So I will just move to our next group of bunch. We have Christo and Mary, Sophia, Resna, and Puin, who are 5 different TEL practitioners or education developers in their own institution. And we had two students, Oma and Len, who looked into their experience of learning in network learning environment. And we had 4 students, or the autoethnographer, who looked into students' experience on behalf of students, which was interesting tweak. But we had here, we had 4. So Mohamed and Francie and JB and Paola. So those are our 60 authors. I think 11 of you said they could make it. So our authors prepare their own response to panelist questions. So they will come back and join the conversation as well. So let's just move into our first panelist. I think we're great on time. It made me pretty nervous. So the first one who we're going to have is Ashwin, Professor Paul Ashwin. Do I have to really introduce him to you? I don't know. The world should know him now. But Paul Ashwin is a professor of higher education and the head of our department. He's overseeing 4 doctoral programs, including the 12th program that this special issue came out of. And he's author of the recent book, Transforming University Education, a manifesto. And a recent article he had been writing, also he been explore the different purpose, ultimate purpose of higher education, what university is supposed to do for the society or social or individual transformation. So I'm particularly excited to hear what Paul can say about this issue that we want to talk to. All right, Paul, do you want to come in?
Yes, I do. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Kyungmee. So it's a privilege to kind of kick off this discussion of this really exciting special issue. If you've not read it, I really encourage you to read it. I really enjoyed reading the different articles, and they give a really rich evocation of different experiences of the researchers concerned. So congratulations to everyone involved. It's a brilliant special issue, and you should be really proud of your contribution. So I should be upfront in making my comments and say I am not an autoethnographer. It's not something I do. It's not something I would claim expertise in. So I'll give some of my reflections on what the special issue made me think about. But I'm aware as I do this that I might be stumbling into stale debates within autoethnography. So if I am, feel free just to tell me and explain where those debates have got to. What I am interested in, and as Kyungmee said in her kind introduction, is my research is really focused on knowledge in higher education, how we give students access to knowledge, how that knowledge changes who students are and what they can do in the world. And also, as a PhD supervisor, I'm very kind of conscious that one of the things that, one of the key assessment criteria to get a PhD is making an original contribution to knowledge. So as I read through these different exciting contributions, I was really thinking about, okay, so what are the forms of knowledge that are going on in these different contributions? And clearly, as you'd expect, given the definition that Kyungmee offered of autoethnography, there's an awful lot of personal knowledge that's being developed, an awful lot of reflections on experiences in a systematic way that develops an understanding for the person writing it, and also as a reader. As you look at that and you think about those experiences and relate them to your own, there's also a sense of personal knowledge developing. There's also within, it kind of as a set of articles, there's kind of interesting contrasts that some people kind of very much focus on the personal, other contributions focus more on local groups of people and think in a way that I would understand as more about developing local knowledge. And then there are kind of instances where people are really focused on what does this say kind of more publicly? How does this make a contribution to the literature? And I think, and sometimes that's about the literature about autoethnography, and I'm interested in how much we go there, or how much we say actually this tells us something about other forms of bodies of literature. And I kind of realize that I'm running out of time, so there's a couple of things I would highlight. Is within autoethnography, how do we challenge each other's interpretations? If someone gives a rich evocation of their context, creating particular categories, what is the route by which we challenge each other in doing that? Because there's something about challenging personal experience in the way that it's presented in autoethnography that's kind of really quite difficult. And how we have that as a reasonable conversation, I think, is really interesting. And then to finish with my question, where I end up with is a question around, okay, so given these different forms of knowledge, given these different forms of personal, local and public knowledge, what for the different contributors are the most important knowledge outcomes from autoethnography and why?
Thank you so much, Paul. Very good on time as well. So I think I want to invite, first of all, probably a couple of authors, if they want to contribute and respond to Paul's question based on your own experience and thoughts. So JB, do you want to come in and try it out?
Sure. Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for your question. I'm going to try to answer the second one actually first, where you ask what is the most important knowledge outcome of autoethnographies and why. And I'd like to answer this question and talk about the most important outcomes actually, not just in terms of knowledge, because I think if we limit the answer to knowledge, for example, in my case, I studied the life of students during the COVID, during the pandemic. It taught me that I actually had to redesign the student experience by, bringing some online and blended element in the experience to help them through their studies, even after the pandemic. But beyond that, to me, writing an autoethnography was first and foremost a very transformative experience for two reasons. The first one is I discovered both the students and myself under a different light. Because I wasn't normally involved with students. I work as a TEL director. I supervise the creation of online programs. So I'm not a teacher. I don't interact with them normally a lot. I never thought of myself as someone who's particularly emotional up to now, but I realized how much I cared about them while doing these interviews. And I got really emotional, like 4 times, hearing their difficulties and their stories. I even cried. Every time I talk about this autoethnography, actually, I remember this feeling. I have it here. And I also thought that, doing this work was really meaningful because any researcher should try, even if you have like 20 years of experience, for example, you should try writing an autoethnography at least once in a lifetime because you get to know yourself. It has an impact on your identity and your role, I think. It changed me from the very start of the program. I think it would have been different if I had done this autoethnography at the end, because I would have written more conventional papers all the time, and I would have get to know myself just at the very end. And the second reason that I really loved it, it transformed me, is because I became really fond of evocative writing style. Although it was my very first paper, I don't think I did a really great job at it, but anyway, evocative writing truly inspired me, and even though I haven't written one yet since the first one, I just can't go back to conventional writing anymore. And every time I write a qualitative research now, I just use my emotion to tell a story. I like to be provocative, for example, in my stories. I become part of the story, and I want the readers, who might not be researchers, they could be learning designers or people in education. I just want them to feel something and create some reaction within them, so that they can see things under a different angle or take actions to change education as they know it, as they accept it, without challenging taken for granted assumptions about TEL, for example. There's a quote, I finished by that. There's a quote that I like from an American writer, a poet, who's Maya Angelou, and she said, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that's really represents to me that autoethnography.
Thank you so much, JB. Can we have one more Yeah, I think I can see some Rob Hart and some hands, but not really raised hands. So can we invite one more authors? Probably one more author who can respond. Okay, Penny, do you want to come in, please?
Hello, everyone. So my experience with autoethnography, yes, for me, it was also the first time to get to know autoethnography. And to be honest with you, I really liked this style of writing and research. I'm not so evocative. I'm more of an analytical autoethnographer because I really like bold statements in my papers, as Kyungmee has realized from my style of writing. But what I really liked writing this paper was the fact that I was able to reflect on my experiences as a professional. My paper is about native speakerism and discrimination in higher education. And it was really interesting to me, not only to reflect on my experiences, but also reflect on the experiences of the people I had to interview during this process. So being able, to disseminate their message, what they felt as well, okay, and if possible to make an impact in our field. I think this is remarkable, and only this type of research and methodology gives you actually the means to do it, okay, to be able to promote your experience, other people's experience, because usually in academia, I don't know if someone asks you, oh, how do you feel? And I think this should be better promoted.
Thank you so much, Penny. That was lovely to hear. So shall we just go back to the question a little bit? I mean, so I can hear the authors want to just share their exciting feeling experience with doing autoethnography. But okay, so we had a really good time. I can hear you. So individually, we experienced some transformative learning experience. That's great. And then, so what after that? So question is more like, then the knowledge that we have written and celebrating here, what is that really doing beyond our own happy feeling that we have, that we love this writing and we feel free? So what kind of useful knowledge we actually, do you think that we produce something useful beyond ourselves? So shall we just think about the knowledge production that we have done? Come on, let's come up. Some of you have to nod your head. Come on. I've been doing this for like 5 years, guys. All right. So Point, thanks. Come in.
Oh, I'll give it a go for you, Kyungmee, just for you. I think in terms of knowledge production, kind of echoing what JB said about this being the first module that we did on the program, and I'm glad about that, because I think there was a lot of anxiety entering onto a PhD program. That's normal for everyone, and I'm glad that I was allowed to write using I rather than using other ways of, academic writing sometimes is quite rigid. It's quite kind of, you have to desensitize your emotion. You have to be objective and all that. And with the first module, we were told, throw the oil out the window, just inject your emotion, just be you, and kind of found your identity. And I'm glad that's happened so early on, because then I think from a personal, from a kind of building scholarly identity, as it were, perspective, I've managed to kind of start from a strong position. I can say what I want to say. I can write using I if I wanted to. So yeah, that's just the kind of, I hope I'm answering the question a little bit. It helped to build a strong foundation for me, from my personal perspective. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, we can come back to that point when our third panelist talk about what it means for us to be a TEL researcher in the long journey. So that will be good to pick it up again. Thank you so much, Point. So shall we have one more? The Fowler, do you want to come in? And Uma, maybe you can come in for the next session, if that's all right. Next part of the conversation. Hi.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm driving at the moment, so because it's very early here, so I'm just gonna keep my camera off for a bit. I think for me, one of the one of the main outcomes of it, and I'm taking it from a different perspective, is I come from computer science, and very often people don't see the need for humanities or even liberal arts in computer science. And my background was history originally before I went into computer science, and I worked at an institution where they are liberal arts degrees. So they do a lot of courses that, well, not a lot, but they do a few courses that are outside of computer science. And I think one of the main outcomes is using your knowledge and using your own experience with an autoethnography to show people, in my instance, the benefit and how liberal arts and how humanities can actually contribute to your knowledge in computer science or even in your skills in computer science. So I think one of the main outcomes is it started off for me as showing my students how that benefited them, even when they thought it didn't. And then when the article was released, I had quite a few friends internationally who said they never thought that, humanities or liberal arts contributed to computer science in that kind of way. So I think in using your knowledge, and using your experience, you can actually show how, in my instance, like I said, how things can benefit, or how your experiences actually matter in those types of instances.
Thank you very much for safe drive, though. I hope we don't really disturb your driving, as we are so exciting here. So I just want to invite just one of the audience, not the authors or panelists. So I know that too much pressure on you, but you don't have to know about autoethnography. If it's first time for you to come and listen to what autoethnography is, maybe you can say something. Okay, so I may just go with my colleague then, if I don't mind. I mean, Jen, I can see you with smile. I don't know, I can't stop. Just can you please come in and share your thoughts, please?
Thanks, Kyungmee. Yeah, well, so just firstly, this is all fascinating, and it's just so wonderful to hear this from students. So I suppose if I was going to ask a tricky question back to you to sort of keep this conversation going, is that I so agree with everything that's been said about writing that's passionate, writing where you have identity and not this faux objectivity of the mythical academic writing. And it's great to lose all those shackles early on. But I suppose the question is there a way in which autoethnography, of all the different ways, achieves that de-shackling, demystifying better than any other ways? So I suppose I'm asking this myself because I think I do all of that, but I don't do autoethnography. So what I'm really interested in, is there something I'm missing out, or are we conflating two things here?
I can just briefly respond. That's a great question. I think there's something probably online distance education and online doctoral education bit should come in. I think a lot of experienced researchers being involved in this practice, actually overall and naturally we develop some of the sense that you have, Jen. So you don't really need anything structurally pushing you to focus on yourself, but you feel confident and you feel free to add your emotion in your writing. You can do a beautiful job in terms of writing, although you do qualitative case study. But autoethnography is, at least for me, it's very structurally and a well-designed pedagogical tool, almost as a tutor. I use it in that way for just really pushing my student that it's okay. If I let them do case study, they wouldn't be able to get that far. So for me, that's something that probably for novice researcher, qualitative researcher, this can be good training opportunity for them to really learn how to do evocative writing and move on to potentially, if there's probably 10 or 20 different methodological approaches that can do the same thing after having this experience. But it's just a little bit of scaffolding. That's probably because I've been thinking a lot about that. So that question was really helpful, Jen. So I hope I kind of, sorry that I should stop talking, but like, I don't know how to. So let me just we're going to move to a second part of the session, but I'm just probably briefly bring Paul back here. If Paul, you want to kind of, summarize your point after hearing the students and
thanks. So I think what's really interesting, and it kind of relates to your pedagogical point, to me is that I think the processes that people have talked about so richly are processes in all research. So a key element of all research is being able to write a narrative, being able to write a convincing narrative that has an impact on the reader and challenges them to understand. All research involves that, and some people are better at that than others. And I have a colleague in another institution who's just brilliant at working out narratives for research papers. And often we don't think about those processes enough. And clearly those narratives are disciplined by the data we have and our analysis of the data, whether that's for autoethnography or anything else. But actually that kind of creative and taking care of the writing process speaks to all forms of research. So as you say, Kyungmee, having that as a pedagogical tool to introduce people to a method that makes those issues much more explicit than they are in other forms of research is really useful. And just to finish by congratulating everyone once again for a brilliant special issue. It's lovely reading your writing. It's so evocative. You get such a three-dimensional sense of the context that people are working in. So, really, really, really well done.
Thank you so much on behalf of us. I appreciate that comment. And I just want to draw quickly your attention to chat. The Amy has put really good point down there. So I don't think that we have time to invite Amy on stage, unfortunately, but I think it's a really good point that probably better than what I said. So we're going to move to second part of this session with Lesley. So Lesley, can I see? Oh yeah, hi. So thank you so much. So actually Lesley is the one in the, so recently we went to Network Learning Conference, and I remember you were the only audience in the room who kind of listened to us and me talking about autoethnography. So it was really nice to have you in that room. I mean, sorry that I'm just talking a little bit like beyond us kind of chat, but that's why I was extremely excited when you said yes to this invitation. So good to have you here. And so I'm going to introduce Lesley. She is a professor of education and formerly the head of department of the culture, communication and media at the CTEL, and she's director of the academic writing center formerly as well. So it's like she has a good combination of background, can have strong say about what we've been discussing here. So she's the author of the recent book, Post-Humanism and Digital University Text Bodies and Materialist. So a lot of conversation we've been having in my module about what it means to be digital and what it means for us to be a TEL researcher as we were writing has been really influential. So shall I invite you to the stage and listen to your comments?
Okay, thank you, Kyungmee. It's a real pleasure. Can everyone hear me okay? Give me some thumbs up or something. It was really nice to be invited to make a contribution to today's event. And just like Paul and Jan were saying just now, I want to begin by just complimenting Kyungmee and all the authors of this special issue, because it really is a very high standard, and I really enjoyed reading the papers. There's so much that could be said about individual papers, not enough time to do that, but it was a very thought-provoking and critical collection. I think that's something I want to just set out from the outset. And in your editorial, Kyungmee, I think you've done a fantastic job. It's instead of just advocating in some sense for autoethnography, you've highlighted in quite an unflinching way, I think, some of the challenges it throws up alongside any other research methodology, of course, right? So I had to think about this. I don't have like a lovely, neat speech or set of questions. I've got a few points that I just want to throw out, which might or might not be interesting with respect to these questions. And I've pulled out a couple of phrases from some of the papers, actually. There was somebody, I can't remember which author, I'm afraid, talked about the sense of being turned inside out, or maybe it was you, Kyungmee, who said that. And I thought that was interesting. And that kind of stayed with me. I'm thinking, okay, turned inside out. What's that saying about subjectivity and writing and disclosure? So there was that. There was also the phrase, the healing power of storytelling. And somebody already mentioned storytelling narrative. Paul was just mentioning there as well. And I'm thinking about how interesting it is that I think there's enormous power and potency around the opening of a space for storytelling. But I'm also interested in what happens when we start to do storytelling in terms of generic conventions. Which genres are we pulled towards? Is there a tendency, for example, towards what I wrote many years ago, a paper with Bruce McFarlane about what I would regard as some of the pitfalls and dangers actually of reflective writing, that it can become an enactment of penitence. It can be normative in the guise of developmental. So I think that's interesting, you know, where storytelling, I think, offers us a great deal, but I think there's also some interesting points to be considered regarding the relationship with disclosure and even therapeutic discourses, which do get touched upon in the special. And I suppose my little challenge is, are we, if we're not careful, are we more especially towards the reflexive element in an ED programme, and I supervise ED students myself, is there a danger with that voice that we're being drawn into self-surveillance and a sense of the, you know, ideal employee or the perfectible human subject? So that's my first set of questions, is, you know, let's think about what really happens when we self-disclose in a narrative. You know, how is that story resolved or not? Is there space for a lack of resolution? Is there space for reticence and silence? This is a theme that I'm working with in my new book, actually, so I'm kind of not sure about it myself. So that's the first thing. Second thing, briefly, is related. And I think this is so complex, and I'm not an autoethnographer either, so I'm sorry if I'm saying all things that you've already studied inside out and old debates that have been resolved decades ago, or maybe I'm just a bit of an outsider to this. But I do also think about, you know, obviously the positioning of the, you know, I mean, one of the criticisms, which I don't really share actually, is obviously about standpoint epistemologies and how do we engage with a single narrative, even if that narrative draws in a wider set of context, you know, and then we think about, are we collapsing into a humanism? How do we take on board, for example, socio-material and social and socio-political, I'm not going to use the word context because I don't like that word anymore, but meshworks, networks. Mike Johnson has left. It's a shame because I wanted to see what he had to say about the relationship between this and post-phenomenography, but he's already just posted something in the chat. So yeah, I guess these are my questions. They're a bit rambling. But I thought it was really interesting, Kyungmee, that you used the image that you used, and the one that seemed to have the greatest resonance was that it was a very fragmented image, but it was also mirrors. And I'm like, okay, what does that tell us? What, you know, where do we get to? So I suppose this is all about maybe not direct questions, but I suppose if I was to pose a question to authors or others, would be something like that, you know, something like, where is the story? You know, if all research refracts, right? All research, all methodologies are some form of refraction or diffraction, or however you want to use the metaphor, or lens. I don't like that, but it's a common one. What does it give us and what does it take away, I suppose, right?
Thank you, Lesley.
I'm sorry if that's not very
No, I think
clear question.
No,
I have no
I think,
idea of the answer myself. But
I think
anyway, it's just a few thoughts.
I think our student can take that questions really nicely, because that's actually some of the struggles that we've been dealing with. It's not like everyone like this and everyone find it easy to share who they are. So the Inside Out, I can't remember exact quotation who have used it, but I remember Karen has pretty similar kind of point in her writing, and also Costas has written about what it means for him to share his story. So no pressure, you can say no, that you don't have anything to add, but I think I can probably be nice to invite you to probably to respond and kind of share something about the weight of sharing your story out there in the form of autoethnography. So especially, I mean, Costas, you've been struggling at the beginning, that's why you have to, I mean, you don't have anything to share even. So that's another side of it, like, you know, so it's okay for you to have, I don't know, 2 second or 3 second or 5 second, no less than 10 seconds to think about and come in, just say what you feel, and other authors or audience are, of course, feel free to raise. Okay, Costas, please.
Yeah, okay, I can't find the hand anywhere, it's gone through my screen. So what's the question again?
So how did you experience sharing your stories and some of the struggles that you kind of try to grasp? I think that's really essence of the Lesley's questions about, you know, what it means for you to have to kind of talk about yourself, and then those narrative, I mean, where it's going to go is like beyond, you know, that reflection is like beyond the self, you know, indulgent, like kind of therapeutic act to share your things without aim or.
Okay, well, it was easy for me to do autoethnography because I simply wrote about myself and my life, professional mostly, and personal at some point. It was a great experience, but if I was asked to write one more, I wouldn't know what to write about. I mean, this topic, my private tutoring of English in conjunction with my state school teaching, it came naturally. I just narrated what has been happening to my life on a daily basis for quite a long time now. So it came out naturally. It was some kind of disclosure because officially I'm not supposed to be doing that by law because of the private money, the income. But I didn't, at no point did I really feel I was being, I was jeopardizing anything because as a matter of fact, everybody does this where I live in Greece. I mean, private tutoring, unofficially. But like I said before, there has to be something to say in order to do autoethnography. If not, I mean, I can relate to colleagues who at first at least didn't know what to write about, because if you don't have to tell a story, what can you do about that? And as far as I'm concerned, I really wouldn't know what to write about for a second autoethnography. Just that.
Good for you. Module has finished, so you're free to do not autoethnography work. But thank you so much. That's very, yeah, I remember the conversation we've been, and greatly appreciate that you have shared that in your piece. The Karen, I think you're the one who wrote the Inside It Out bit. Do you want to come in and share what you meant by it?
Hi, hello everyone. Well, you know that when you start writing the autoethnography, definitely everything is messy. I mean, inside your head, because since you are talking about the struggles and the emotions, in my case, about the challenges that you face as a teacher who is leading with people with special needs. everything is messy at the beginning, but what I recall from that experience of writing the autoethnography is that I rely on Atlas T as a way to categorize all those challenges, strategies, and things that were also messy in my head, inside my head. So I remember when you told us that some people were criticizing that why are we teaching autoethnography at the beginning of the PhD? And I was saying, oh, okay, is this people out of their minds? It is not fair because I know what they mean when you start writing autoethnography. I know that they mean that you are like telling an anecdote, or maybe they have the feeling that it is worthless because it's like an anecdote or a story that you are maybe making up, but it is not. I think that these tools such as Atlas T and also like the guidance of the tutors are always lighting, the dark tunnel that you are walking in. And of course, maybe at the end of the writing, what you really feel, and I feel that is also like the real purpose of writers in general, of literature in general, is that obtaining that sense of empowerment. Because in my country, for example, in the global South, I mean, in general, I think that you are taught to shut up. I mean, you cannot talk. So that's why also writing is really difficult, because you have been learning for years and years to remain silent. So yeah, definitely Atlas T was like my tool to enlighten that part. And yeah, that's the way I found the way out in order to start writing in a better way so people could understand what I meant.
Thank you, Karen. Mary, do you want to come in? And then, I'm sorry, after Mary, Nicola from the audience, if you want to come in after Mary to share what you have written, I really like it. That would be really good. So take a moment to be ready for us, please, if that's all right. So Mary, can you go?
Yes, thank you, and good day, everyone. Lesley, you asked the question, what does it give and what does it take away? In my experience, there is a spectrum between fear and risk, and somewhere in between there's courage. So for me, in terms of what the experience of writing autoethnography has done, is it's given me, it can be very liberating. So for me, it's been very liberating. And in terms of taken away, it's taken away fear. So it's that that balance between fear and risk, and for me, finding I feel like I can take on the world, and so in a safe way, nothing too crazy. But so that's my answer: is it provides liberation and also takes away fear.
Thank you. So Nicola, can I see you? Oh, yeah, thanks for the comment. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of the papers are more individual, and I think depending on what you're saying, I mean, as a method, it can be quite risky when you're using it to talk about certain things. So, for example, working with other educational technology specialists and academic developers about COVID, our university's reactions to emergency remote teaching and that kind of thing. It's risky. I'm from South Africa. I'm not saying it's less risky anywhere else, but I just wondered about, as a method, what you can be critical of, and sometimes you can use the method, but using it collaboratively might make it a little bit less risky.
Thank you so much, Nicola. We definitely are going to come back to that, because next panelist, we're going to talk about community building in the online doctoral education. So let's just put that one. Amy, I want to briefly bring you into, because you've been writing really well. So can you just actually say with your beautiful voice for us?
Hello. So I'll just say what I said in the chat. So I think for me, when we self-expose, it's what, like, so sharing a secret. And I think sometimes it's a lot easier to write down how you feel in paper or on a notepad or something than it is to actually sit in front of somebody and to share those thoughts and experience to somebody in a real situation. So, you know, I feel like, and again, what I said in the chat, if somebody were to, you know, if we were doing semi-structured interview or something and somebody was asking me some questions, I may then adapt or perhaps not share all my true feelings than I would if I were to write some narrative and then to go back over and, you know, try to get my themes from my own experiences.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amy. We've been having lots of drafts, so a lot of details are actually omitted for our final publication, which made me disappoint a little bit in some cases. But yeah, I think we always struggle with how much is right. And so by just saying that, we have one question from audience, but that question, it will be great when we have Tony, actually. That's so we're going to deal with that question in the last part of the session. I just want to invite Lesley one more time. So sorry, I think that conversation is all like just like questions, all messy, but I hope to hear from you as like kind of final thoughts.
Well, I mean, just thanks to everyone for those reflections. I don't really have anything to sort of cap that with, really. I just think it's incredibly interesting. I think the points about disclosure, I'm still, because I'm an ex-linguist, I'm always drawn back to what it is about writing, for example, that is particularly special. And what is it? I'm sorry, Amy just said there, I think was really interesting. But also the previous speaker about courage and risk. So yeah, thank you, and thanks again for involving me with today. It's been I've learned a lot, and it's been really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Lesley. All right, so I want to propose us to have quick comfort break. Everyone looks like the most happy now, I know. So we're gonna have like 9 minutes, if that's okay. So if everyone can come back like 1:05, and then we can kick off with the kind of later part of the session. Great. To have everyone back, and Swapna, do you want to share your screen? You can try it now because you have the right to share. So while I'm introducing you, you can. So we have two more panelists from USA. So just to begin with, thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's pretty early there. And also, I don't know, I have to say special thank you to Swapna, that you're from Florida. And I try not to even bother you last week, although I sent reminder email, but I wasn't really sure, as I was totally ready that you can say, you know, situation is not good. So I heard you said that you don't have power and internet. So given all the situation, I feel like crying, but thank you so much for joining us. It's my great pleasure to have you here. As I want to introduce you to the audience. So Swapna is a critical professor of education technology and coordinator of online EDD in educational technology at College of Education at University of Florida in USA. So what this means is if UK have Lancaster, actually US have University of Florida doing very similar doctoral education online. And Swapna has been the researcher who's been writing about it, who really helped me a lot when I first teach this strange situation. I've been reading her articles and books, so I'm particularly interested in hearing what you can say about what we have tried to do in this other part of the world. And again, thank you so much for joining us. So are you all right?
Absolutely. Can you hear me? And I apologize, I probably should not have had slides, but at this point, given what's going on in our lives here. I could not focus without, so bear with me. And lovely to be here. I really enjoyed reading the special issue, reading the reflections especially. So this is really quickly. I really took Kyungmee's prompt seriously about relating this to my own research and what I know about online doctoral education. I'd like to pull back and focus this back on online doctoral education, just because that is the context in which this is taking place. And I really want, and this is something probably the people who've gone through really know about.
Just
I did
one
my
sec,
doctorate.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but your
Yeah.
slides, we can't really see it, or it's only me who can't really see it full.
Can you not see it?
Yeah, but it's not presentation, but like somehow.
Why don't I do the present? If I don't do the presentation,
Yeah, I think that
is
will
it
be,
better?
it's big enough.
Okay, let's just do this.
Thank you.
Let's stick with this for now. Okay, I'll try to make it as big as possible. Is that better? I apologize. So yes, as Kyungmee said, I just wanted to reiterate it. We were back with power and internet for the last 24 hours. Very happy about that. And back online. Okay, so I just wanted to step back and acknowledge the context in which this is taking place, because I know that we have focused on autoethnography. My research and my all my work is in online doctoral education in the past, I would say 15 years, 12 years, 12, 15 years. And I lead an online doctoral program that I helped develop. We have been struggling with some of the issues that most people, as Kyungmee said, who jump into this space struggle with. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that doing a doctoral program online from your country, and I'm sure the people here can speak a lot more about it than I can, involves a lot of isolation, lack of contact, lack of sense of connection to the universities, and difficulties building relationships and communicating differences. And when I say cultural differences, it could be academic culture, it could be social, any kind of cultural difference that you feel from the others in your group, or even from what is expected at the university at which you are doing that doctoral program. So that, I think, is something that needs to be acknowledged in this tremendous work in the special issue that has taken place. And I suspect this is the driver for why Kyungmee even started this in some ways. The other area that's a huge issue for doctoral students is, as everything I've seen in my research and over about 100 odd doctoral programs, doctoral students that we have graduated in our program, is the absence of really peer modeling and modeling of research that you get on campus when you have research apprenticeships, when you're just watching people do research around you, talking research all the time with people around you, and it's hard to model that online. The other area that I believe, so my work is a lot with professional students who work full-time in their contexts, do their research in context, and the supervisors at the university in their own country where the student is doing the doctorate, and they don't necessarily understand what's going on in that context. They might be an expert in the research method or the actual topic, but they are not necessarily an expert in the context. And it's often difficult for that doctoral student to communicate that context in which that research is taking place and what they bring to it. They're embedded in that context very often. They're studying their own context very often, and they take on multiple roles of, I'm influencing this context, I'm part of this context, and I'm conducting research in this context, or culture, even if it's not in their specific immediate context. So those are some of the challenges that happen, and technology enhanced learning, what we here term educational technology, essentially involves processes of change when you introduce a technology, when technology is implemented in a context. So these are some of the things that doctoral students online grapple with. So in our model of a doctoral program that we wrote about in the last 10 years, we talked about disorienting dilemmas that doctoral students face in this online space with all these other issues, and talked about how critical awareness of their own perspectives and presuppositions, what they bring to it, is so essential to the work they do in that online space. And I keep going back to the online because that communication of what's going on with them, what they bring, is so important when they don't have that continuous connection and communication with their supervisor and people around them. We in our program also believe a lot in exposure to new knowledge and perspectives in that community. So I know I'm talking a lot, but I just wanted to go back to the fact that autoethnographies, as I saw it from this special issue and all the reading I did about your work, can really help, I believe, in that, establishing that positionality that we do something very similar in our doctoral program, which I won't get into at this point in my 5 minutes, but I think it really helps people when they start out reflect on why they are here, where they're coming from, what they bring to this, and what their positionality might be. That's a loaded term, but I just used it because I was in a hurry, and that's the first term that came to my mind. And they are able to communicate their context and culture, especially not just to the supervisor, but to other researchers who might read their work, to their own cohort, which helps establish community. These two areas, that sharing of yourself, I know we've talked a lot about how it's important to your own learning, but it's also important to build community with the other people who are going through that process with you, because you don't have that opportunity for informal coffee and conversations and, in the corridor. So really, and I know that's a really difficult process, which some of you have talked about beautifully in your writing. So it builds community. And I'd like to go back to the fact that I do think it's important when you're talking about technology, because we assume that when we talk about Twitter, talk about mobile learning, talk about any aspect of technology enhanced learning, it's the same, and it means the same to different people. And often it does not. It's very dependent on the context in which it's used, and everything that and the person and the lens that person is using to look at it. So those are just my thoughts. Like I said, I want to situate this more in the online space. And I'd also like to think about, we talked about this autoethnography as the beginning of the doctoral program. But in our program, we keep coming back to this reflective process time and time again through the program. And I truly believe there's that value in constant reflection, continuous reflection, as you continue to do technology enhanced learning research. So I guess my question for everybody is really, how can autoethnographies contribute to online doctoral students' development as technology enhanced researchers, as they're navigating the online space, the connections with their cohort and supervisor, and actual tech and the discipline, which is what we work in also, which is hugely important, the constant change in technology enhanced learning and in our context. So I'm going to stop finally. I hope I didn't overshoot my time, and I will throw that question out and stop sharing if that's okay.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Swapna. I really appreciate you reading the context for us. All right, so Penny, I can see your hand. And if anyone else wants to also share, take some moment and then raise your hand. That will be useful. But Penny, it's for you.
I think Swapna's question could be the topic of our next paper. Especially because this was like our first module. Like almost everyone, I believe, in our cohort talked about past experiences, not necessarily, related to online education, online doctoral education. So I believe, and I think Swapna, I think if you're doing that in your department, that's excellent. I think now we are in our third year, we are at the end of our part 1 program, and we've been through 5 modules. So I believe this is the time to actually go back and reflect on our experience, because now we've had like 5 different tutors. We had to interact with other people, like from other cohorts. We had our residentials. Everything was online. So now, to be honest with you, now I feel I'm in a position to go back and reflect in terms of how alone I felt, especially in times when I couldn't connect with my classmates so often, and how I had to cope with my own research deadlines, and how the online environment was quite different from a face-to-face doctoral program. So especially people from my cohort, like now it could be a really, really good time to go back and revisit this issue. And maybe at some point during this event or later, maybe we could actually talk about the positionality of autoethnography in terms of journals and position in academia. I mean, which journals would actually accept a paper in autoethnography? How, you know, actually I'm using my paper to go to different conferences, and you know, in every conference I go, people don't know what is autoethnography, and it's really, really exciting for me to introduce to them something new. But this is another area that maybe we should like shed a light into, which communities in academia can really, really accept this type of writing, and if the renamed the renowned, like, you know, a reviewer too will accept a paper like this. I'm a member in a group about reviewer too, and how harsh and strict they can be when you send your paper like to a journal. So this is like a different area I'm really interested into.
Thank you so much, Penny. Yeah, as personally, I really feel dedicated to this area of research myself. So more than welcome to join me and everyone else too. So it would be nice to have conversation continue. So Mary, do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you. And I'm always glad to see a Florida neighbor, even across the ether like this. So how does autoethnography contribute to online doctoral students in TEL? For me, it answers the question of how do I show up? It speaks to presence. And am I present? Am I truly present? And again, for me, it embeds a sense of agency and accountability for myself and towards others, and causes me to think about what am I gaining and what am I giving? And again, coming back to agency, what do I have agency over to change, and what steps do I need to take to bring about that change? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I think we had one comment before from one of the authors that I wanted to come back with this, but I can't remember. So, well, if you remember yourself that I said that we're going to come back here, please come to us. Is it JB? Was that you that I said that we may just?
No, I remember the question it was from Kiao Tune, I think. Sorry for the pronunciation. And the question was, how could a researcher incorporate this method in conducting and writing research, which does not use autoethnography as a main method? I can post it on the chat if you'd like.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Q, hello, thank you so much for contributing with your question. Do you want to come in and kind of ask question by yourself, or is it all right for us to?
Yes, hello, thank you so much for all the panelists and the contributors. Yes, that's the question I would like to, I'm thinking also, how could other researchers, other research which don't use the other methods mainly, how can we incorporate autoethnography writing or autoethnographic method in our research?
All right.
That's what I would like to do. Thank you so much.
That's really good question that I can't remember now, that actually we're going to bring that question for Tony, but since it's here, so let's unpack this question a little bit. If anyone from the audience want to respond, that would be good. Also responding. So JB, it's your hand actually raised now for response, or?
Yes, yeah, I thought that
okay,
question was interesting. So because that's what I mentioned at the beginning, I'm trying to use what we learned during the evocative writing, during the autoethnography, into other writings now. So for example, my last paper could be a very conventional one. It was a discourse analysis. about how to develop and assess soft skills in an immersive learning environment. And actually, so I always think of my own situation and how I feel about that, and I use it in the writing. For example, when I talk about soft skills, I assumed in the paper I wrote, I assumed that when in my daily work, I knew what were the soft skills I had, and I was wrong about it. I realized which skills I needed, for example. So I include myself in the story as well, although it's a discourse analysis. Or I tell how, as a practitioner, I immerse myself into what we like to call now the metaverse. So, and I explain how I was fairly disappointed looking at vintage video games, which gave a glimpse of fun and taught me strictly nothing. So I use this kind of feelings and expression in the writing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll just briefly add that I remember some colleague from, I can't remember the university, but university in North America is doing very similar things, but he is doing it for master's program online. So he couldn't really do entire process of autoethnography, but he used the term like principle drawn from autoethnography and tried to really practice some of the really key exercises in his class for master student in very short term to be able to reflect on themselves and bring some questions related to themselves and things like that. So maybe there's other ways that we can deal with it. But I may want to just go back to probably Swapna's question. I want to invite one from our colleague again, you know, where I'm going to go. Brett, do you want to come in? And it kind of also be really interesting to hear other staff members in the programs having to say about the point raised by Swapna and question as well.
So yes, I mean, no pressure then. I mean, the question was about research and development. And I suppose I can say something about that because I, for my sins, convene modules for students who've kind of gone through this first. So I kind of see the outcome. And I, in my module, am not trying to persuade students to do autoethnography. I don't dissuade it, and a few students do. But I think it's true that one sees a kind of autoethnographic sensibility. The extracts that JB was just referring to, I think, JB's going to correct me if I'm wrong, are from the paper he wrote for my module, right? So, yes. So we get a kind of sense of autoethnographic sensibility even when one is not doing autoethnography explicitly. Now, that's interesting because I think if we think back to the conversations that were being had earlier, in actual fact, there isn't a stark demarcation between autoethnography and every other kind of qualitative, reflective kind of research. I mean, I remember this comment from, I think it was Costas, who said, oh, I could never write another autoethnography again, you know, this kind of thing. It's like that thing that everyone has one good novel in them. And maybe they've only got one good novel in them. But I think it depends what you're kind of reacting to. People are not static. They're kind of part of a wider world. They are developing. The world is changing around them. And so if I think of the kind of skills that you would have to do as an autoethnographer, and I say this as not an autoethnographer, so I can misinterpret this, but you're kind of reading literature, for example, and trying to be influenced by it at a certain part of the project, and actually taking an autoethnographic sensibility to how is that influencing me? To what extent do I disagree? Are my experiences different? I think that's quite valuable because I really try to get students away from this very mechanical gap spotting approach to the literature review, thinking about why am I coming at this research? What is my motivation? I think that's a useful skill for all researchers, whether or not they want to do autoethnography or not. Thinking about the impact and the way in which you construct the knowledge having a kind of effect, even an emotional effect on the reader, is something that all researchers need to have, or if many researchers need to have. I mean, I suppose there are people who do purely quantitative work who would try and exclude that, but actually most research in the qualitative field and in our in our program, qualitative research dominates, requires those kind of skills. So off the top of my head, I think I can see a lot of things that students have developed using autoethnography, which they can use whether or not they go on to be autoethnographers or, you know, at all. So I find it very useful, and it's quite interesting to me how students seem more research literate. You know, it's not about just being critical, but being critical about the kind of things that actually in a program like ours, you'd expect students to kind of be forced to do. And they kind of push back. You know, I don't get these kind of bald statements about epistemology and ontology in this kind of religious way that I might have.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry, I think just mindful of time, but I think you have made really good point that really actually nicely answering this question on the day tasks. I really appreciate that. Sorry, no offense though. Len, I can see your hand up, but I think it will be good to move on to the last session, and then we have 10 minutes toward the end that we can just have open discussion. I will remember this time and I will invite you back. So just before moving to the last panelist, Swapna, can you just come back briefly and just to close the conversation off for us? That will be really good.
Thank you. I think I've enjoyed the conversation also about, you know, as I think Brett said, people get very focused on the gaps. And often it is about also what you bring or what you want to do or the problems that you want to address, especially for professional students, I would say, and professional research in context. That's something to keep in mind. In our program, Brett, we did an analysis of dissertations, and it's been mainly mixed methods, followed by qualitative and then quantitative. And definitely, you know, that what do I want to get out of this is also something to call out, also to see that you're not being extremely, you know, one-sided, and sharing helps with that. The one other thing I'd just like to say is that we often think research and development is, we're looking at it from the outside, but it's also about the people who are in the program realizing and acknowledging their own development. And I think that engaging in this process really helps them be more cognizant of their own development as researchers also, not just people from the outside looking at, you know, have they grown or not. So this is great, a lovely conversation. I look forward to continuing it. I'm good.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great. So we're moving into our last one. So Tony, thanks for waiting all those time. I just wanted to have the last one because it would be really nice to finish with someone who can say something about autoethnography after hearing all these things. I hope that this was helpful for you to understand the context, or I mean, although Lesley doesn't like the word context, but context at the setting we've been dealing with. So may I introduce you? I mean, we all have read your work here. So Tony is Caterpillar Professor and Chair of the Department of Communication at Bradley University in USA as well. So it should be pretty early. And then our loved textbook of autoethnography, you're one of the author of it. So the floor is yours. Could you please come in and give us your comments, please?
Absolutely. Hey folks, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, some folks. So thank you all for having me. And it's just a treat to always spend time with having these conversations and hearing stuff. So I just wanted to make a few comments after working through some of the article. It's a fantastic issue, and it's congratulations that this is a huge accomplishment. And I will say why here in a moment too. So I think that you know, I came to this discussion and this issue and through these essays and the commentary that autoethnography in my world foregrounds vulnerability, self-reflexivity, and introspection and ethical concerns. Like all methods, it's not appropriate for everyone or for all projects, and a researcher might not have the skills, the desires, the resources, the questions to do autoethnography. And I think when I think about autoethnography, I do a lot of comparative work with other methods and paradigms. And so I think about quantitative research in general often requires this keen understanding and use of math. Experiments, my colleagues do experimental research. It often requires equipment, space, software, technology, knowledge of the technology. Interviews require the ability to find and interact and select people to learn more about their lives, experiences, and opinions. And autoethnography, of course, it can involve others, and several of you have shown how it can involve others. Requires this vulnerability, self-reflexivity, and introspection and prioritization of ethical concerns. Those are the skills required of autoethnography. And those have to be considered, because if you don't have those skills, don't do autoethnography. You will never see me doing experiments and surveys. That's not in my wheelhouse. I still appreciate them. I still recognize the value in those methods. This gets into the increased acceptability of autoethnography. And in my work, I've been now doing this for about 2 decades, but autoethnography has been around for decades, if even centuries. It just wasn't called that. And what I have thankfully have seen, the simple criticisms of autoethnography have absolutely lessened in the past decade. The simple criticisms, calling it self-indulgent navel gazing, I rarely see those in the literature. And some people, when they would say, I less now, and maybe because I'm in an echo chamber, will say, I don't believe in autoethnography. When I hear comments like that, it makes me say, well, I don't believe in experiments or surveys. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. I hear. It might not be the best method for the project, and that's the different kind of question. Or you might say, I don't have the resources or skill set to do autoethnography. I'm going to let other folks do that. That's fine too. I can't do these experiments and surveys that my colleagues put together. With this increased acceptance, this happens with your special issue, there are tons and tons of journals. I could probably name 50 right now that's very welcoming of autoethnographic work that are whatever game we want to play, highly ranked, highly valued. I think there's even a nice handbook in it. I haven't seen it yet, but there's a handbook of autoethnography in educational settings coming out with Routledge next month. I don't know if some folks may be in that one, so it might be interesting. Of interest. But with autoethnography, just to one final point about why we do it. We, as Brett just mentioned, we are the research instrument, and that's especially in qualitative research, but also quantitative research. And autoethnographies capitalize on this. We make decisions about research design, who and who we don't want as participants, what questions to ask, how to language the questions we ask, what language we use in writing up our stories, and what we say about others. We're there in every step of every research process. Some ethnographers they used to do field diaries and treat them as secondary to the research project, but those are autoethnographers say, no, bring those in. There's always selection involved. To borrow JB's words from his essay, there's stories behind the methodology. I think of Dorothy Allison's phrase, what are those stories behind the stories that we aren't telling? And in sharing these stories, we describe how they're the research instrument, and this can promote increased transparency when we talk about our selection process. And with increased transparency, I always read this as increased credibility in our projects. And I think that's important as researchers. I also think the last thing I want to say is autoethnography excels with I latch onto the phrase Shulamit Reinhardt's wrote 3 decades ago in 1992, an epistemology of insiderness. What topics and projects are good and not so good for autoethnography? With autoethnography, this epistemology of insiderness, sometimes our research question might drive the method, but sometimes when we think about what we can learn from our personal experience, sometimes our method, recognizing that we do learn about social life through our experiences, sometimes our method, maybe it's autoethnography, might drive our research question too, and both of those are okay. We should just be transparent and describe these process. The one thing I want to throw, the questions I have for the folks, really, if we think about vulnerability, self-reflexivity, and introspection as what I think are key skills of autoethnography, and a lot of you wrote about these in your essays. What are your tips and strategies for making ourselves vulnerable? That's tricky. And I think of Karen's words in the closing commentary. This is required. These questions are required of doing good autoethnography in my world. How do we admit what we are not, and how do we effectively assess our strengths, which I think we can do probably pretty well with, but our weaknesses too, our strengths and weaknesses. How do we best interrogate and challenge ourselves and our interpretations of our experiences, and determine what to share and what not to share? And that becomes really difficult when we get into issues of, workplace bullying, microaggressions, systemic barriers. So just want to throw that out there. Thank you all for being here. This is cool.
Thank you very much, Tony. Sorry. All right. So, well, it's a great question, and actually, it's a really good question to probably, kind of closing this entire conversation up. But I may give you, I think, 20 per second to think of. But also, I just have my own say about it. For me, accepting the fact that my students do not like me, or I'm not a good teacher, that was the really first point that I have to really get through, is like why I feel so not appreciated by my student. That was my way to start this entire journey of autoethnography, what's going on with me and my students. And I've been writing the first, but I was not brave enough. I went for usually chapters rather than journals, closed chapter, because I'm not really sure how it would be good to other people to read it, but definitely admitting what I'm not good. That was first place to begin with. Just me saying that quickly, and I can see Mary, and I can see also Point. I kind of saw you kind of raising your hand, or it was just mistaken. It was a mistake. That's all right. Maybe you can come in still. But anyway, so let's, Ren. Yeah, I remember that you were there. So maybe we can go for Ren first, because Ren has been waiting. So Ren, do you want to come in first?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. It's been 4 years now since I wrote that paper, so I'm almost forgetting some things. The questions I think that were posed to us, if I was thinking if they were my Viva questions, I would fail for sure. Very good questions. Starting with from Paul, I think it's really interesting. So I have written them down on pieces of paper. Just two things. What the question Tony asked, and I thought about that, and to this day, I haven't shared that paper with my colleagues at work because I was writing about my experience from work, and that's a difficult thing. And I still worry whether somebody will pick it up 20 years from now. And so there is that. And for me, that was a big struggle, really. What I found out I was doing, and this is after reflecting on it, is to deal with that vulnerability, and I kind of try to hide myself at times and distance myself from myself as I was writing. I don't know if that makes sense, but so it was me, but as I was writing, and some of the things that were troubling and just reminding me of experiences, I kind of like say, well, look, I'm thinking about this as how I might have done a few pieces before, and just separate myself. So I wonder about the dangers of doing that, or the taking out the richness of autoethnography by kind of doing that. But it was just my way of doing that. And so that's one. And two, just was following up on what Brett said. I think for me, coming to autoethnography after having worked on a few other bits and pieces before, different methods and different methodologies, I struggled to become an autoethnographer. I don't know if that's ever gonna change. So for example, when I read my paper and it feels like a a regular paper, like, one maybe in ethnography or one of the quant studies I might have done. And it just, my writing was not evocative at all. I don't think so. It's very, very analytical. Well, not very analytical. I am, but analytical in some way. So it's that kind of thing, really. But what I thought it really helped me to do is to become far more reflexive on a topic that is now eventually morphed into my thesis topic. So I think one of the questions is about how do we use it, or perhaps think about it to formulate other things. So yeah, I mean, I really struggled to see AE, autoethnography, different from other approaches, at least in terms of how I present my work. In fact, last thing, I sent a paper a couple of years ago to a journal, a fairly decent journal, and it was conditionally accepted, but they wanted me to write a paper I'd like to write, not the one I wrote, and I didn't know how to do that, so that was a dilemma for me. So in a way, they accepted what was there, but they didn't like that it was called an autoethnography, so they wanted it to be a case study or something like that, and so that was a real thing. So yeah, rambling on, just a couple of things. I think I'll come back to autoethnography definitely after my thesis. One of my friends in here, Sarah, is a big friend. But yeah, there are those struggles. So it's more articulating how I think about it and my experiences. So thanks.
Thanks, that. You're from the first cohort that I have done this. I have to admit, actually, that I didn't know what I was doing 4 years ago when I was working with you. So yeah, maybe some of the evocative writing, I didn't even mention it clearly in my course back then. So that's just my weakness as well back then. But anyway, so thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to move to Mary. Mary, do you want to come in and share?
Sure. So in terms of best practices, I come back to JB, so full circle back to the beginning, who alluded to the effects of autoethnography can sneak up on you at unexpected times. So I would say have a self-care plan in place before you go into it, whether it's forest bathing, knitting, running, whatever is your happy place. So prepare for self-grace. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful even to me. Thanks, Mary. So Point, please.
Turns out I was raising my hand after all.
Yeah, that's what I thought. You should have something to say about this topic.
I do actually. I think someone mentioned, and I apologize, I can't remember who said that, but about positionality and how it changes our way of thinking, our way of writing. And I think it's very important. Positionality and autoethnography goes hand in hand, because your circumstances, the people around you, for me anyway, have directly affected how vulnerable, how much of me I wanted to put in my writing. I don't know if you remember, Kyungmee, I had a change in circumstance in my personal life during the writing process, and I went from quite timid with what I should include to, I just thought, you know what, I'm not in that situation anymore, I'm going to go all in. And I'm you know, a year later, I'm glad I've done that. But I'll be honest with you, the last few weeks I've been feeling quite anxious, because my paper is being read by more people than I thought it would. And I am pretty certain some of the people I've mentioned in the paper have read it, because someone has a complete change in attitude towards me in the last few months. And I just thought it's really interesting, like the vulnerability and anxiety and how much you want to, because, you know, writing autoethnography, there's an element of wanting to sort of somehow, I don't know, right or wrong, or somehow sort of, you know, speak. We have a voice, we need to use it, but it's how much we use it. And sometimes how much we might regret using the voice, because like Len was saying earlier, it might come back to bite you 5 years, 10 years down the line. So I'm going through this sort of complex, and I didn't think when I submitted the paper, I didn't think I would experience what I'm experiencing now. because my circumstance might about to change next year. That means I might go back to the previous situation, and it'll be quite interesting to see how it unfolds. But I spoke to a friend of mine, and she said, well, you wrote it, you published it, own it. Tough, I can't say the words she said, but yeah. So I just thought I'll mention that the personal experience that is still happening a year after I wrote the paper. So it's quite interesting, but also quite anxiety inducing, I have to be honest. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we've been back and forth many times and tried to get things out. And, I think that's one thing that, I find this methodology amazing, because we've been talking a lot about ethics in the class, but unless it's not about self-ethic, actually it's very difficult to grab students' attention that much. They were talking about ethics and they tried to tick the box of doing ethics approval. But actually, when it comes to my relationship with someone that I'm writing in my paper, actually everyone is taking ethics actually pretty seriously in the classroom. So that's one thing that I really appreciate that. Okay, I think we have Jen who has question, but I think one author that we haven't heard yet is Sophia, I guess, if I remember correctly. But Sophia, I'm not really sure your situation. You may not be able to speak up, but I would be love to hear from you as well. So after Jen's question, if you come in and then be able to share some of your thought, that would be lovely. So Jen, please.
Oh, just very quickly, more of a comment. It's what Len said made me realize that for me, what we've been having today are two equally rich but slightly different conversations that relate to one another. And I think this is what's really interesting. One is about how autoethnography enables researcher development, the sense of safety, a way in, the learning of different things that people have said apply elsewhere. It's a slightly different conversation, autoethnography, if this was your thesis and you were asked why this method, and what does it bring? Because there has to be something about the contribution of autoethnography, just like in my personal bugbear, critical realism. People say they use it because they can go under the surface. You can go under the surface in lots of things, but great that some people have found through critical realism, they understand the stuff underneath the surface. So I think those two slightly different uses are quite important, and I think that's what sort of Len was alluding to, but it's great to have got both of them in the one session.
Thank you so much, Jen. That's really nice to sum up in that way. Great. So Sophia,
yes,
good to see you.
Good to see you all. Thank you. I've been listening. It's been amazing. I like what Tony said about the skills, having the skills to expose your vulnerability, having the self-reflexivity that is needed. And this is something perhaps that I would like to add with regards to vulnerability, because this was my challenge. So it's not about understanding how vulnerable you are, it's about exposing how vulnerable you are. So for me, that was the challenge. And because I wrote from my role as a specialist during COVID-19, so I felt vulnerable. I had to expose to, my flaws, my weaknesses, my fears. And of course, it's easier to talk about the weaknesses of others when you do research. So, and you filter all the time. So what you say, what not to say. But I realized that this process brings you closer to your data, and you understand the phenomenon as an insider much, much more. And also, I realized when I came closer to my vulnerability and I had to expose it, or I made the conscious, decision not to expose parts of it, I realized that autoethnography is not about talking about myself. It's about talking about and understanding a phenomenon through myself. And I think this is a very, very important realization.
Thank you so much for that, Sophia. I would love to invite the last person from the audience who can kind of jump in. And then after that, we can close the session with probably Tony kind of sum up and me saying goodbye basically. But all right, to Sarah, you just, it was great timing that I was just trying to invite someone and then you typed something in. So shall I just invite you? Sarah, you've been staying the whole session and I noticed that you've been chatting. I'm not really sure about your circumstances, if you can talk.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a dodgy internet, but I think I'm okay. I've just closed lots of stuff down. So yeah, thanks to everybody. This has been absolutely brilliant. So thank you to Puyin and Len for inviting me along to this. My PhD ended up being an autoethnography. It started out being something very, very different. It started out being a survey. It started out just looking at online. And as I went on, I discovered autoethnography, and I discovered it right at the end of my PhD. And I really wish I discovered it earlier, because for me, it was just like one of these moments when I realized it sort of pulled everything together. But Amy, it was particularly your question that I was thinking about, because for me, autoethnography is a methodology, and it can use lots and lots of different methods. So I don't see a problem using surveys. I know Tony hates them, but I would use surveys, and then I would reflect, I would do an autoethnography about why I used the surveys. So I wanted to throw that open to you, Tony.
That's beautiful. So you just invite Tony yourself. Thank you so much, Sarah. That's really nice. So Tony, do you want to come back and probably sums up what's going on here for us?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Sarah. And I am not the survey researcher. I don't hate surveys. Surveys are wonderful, but they go out, they do different things. You know, I don't do those things or have any goals to do what they do. Just like I don't have goals to do experiments. So no, they're wonderful. They're absolutely wonderful. They just answer go after different issues in question. Yeah, this is awesome. That all of these questions are. We're not going to solve the autoethnographic problems this way, but a lot of big important considerations. I've always come through, you know, I'll end with one you know, at least my thought. I think that there's a few folks have mentioned implicating others. I come to autoethnography through ethnography, and I think ethnographers have struggled with this for a very long time, you have your colonialist impulses, of course, but there are definitely questions of how to represent others and what happens when those others find what we say about them. You know, that doesn't dismiss the method. It shouldn't dismiss the method, but I think it requires us to be very mindful of what are we studying, who are we implicating with our work, by possibly name or pseudonym or not, even in their absence can still implicate others, which it's tricky. And unfortunately, I've seen some bad consequences of people implicating others, and probably shouldn't have done that, but they did. Yeah. But thank you all. This was cool.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was unexpectedly depressing note to finish.
Oh, I know, sorry.
So, well, thank you so much. I mean, that's something for us to think about in the near future. But I think time is really up. I'm sorry that I have to hold everyone for 2 hours. I know we're getting really tired, and myself as well, but given all the work we have, I mean, myself and my students and authors have put for the past 2 years almost, I just want it to be as rich and as long as, you know, potentially that we can do. So just first of all, thank you so much for 4 of the panelists who are willing to come and join us and share your thoughts and made this conversation possible from the beginning. And thank you so much for reading our articles too. I mean, that's something that we often don't have time for each other. So it's really good to know that the 4 professors have read I think that means a lot to me and my students, I'm pretty sure. And I want to also say thank you to all my students and autographers who have contributed to special issue and who came here to talk and contribute to the conversation, and also all the audience that were interested in this topic and come to us today, and other staff from the department showing the support. Yeah, I feel pretty happy, and I feel like we're going to close one chapter of our doctoral or academic development. I'm not really sure whether I'll keep going with the autoethnography for next 20 years, but it's been really good to feel like the sense of achievement I'm pretty sure we all share here as the editor and contribution. And also lastly, thank you so much to you, Brett, as well, who actually have worked on the special issue with us, although you don't have much name on it, but you've been, Brett has been typeset every single articles with his little two hands, so really appreciate that. So I think I didn't forget anyone. I remember here Mary and Cassie and Amy, three of you are actually doing your thesis using autoethnography. Good luck to you. Just all the best. I'm glad that you chose the right methodology for you, but I'll stop there. But by just saying that, I want to say goodbye to everyone, and probably looking forward to the next conversation I can have with everyone. So bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.